The arena was loud with the sound of cruel laughter, boots stamping on steel floors, and the crackle of electrified whips. Alien voices echoed like a storm, filling the cavernous chamber where thousands had gathered to watch another night of entertainment. At the center of the pit, lights blazed down, exposing the trembling figure of a girl. She was small, thin, and broken, her pale skin bruised, her arms shaking under the weight of iron shackles. Chains clinked as she was dragged forward, her feet leaving faint trails of blood on the sand. The crowd roared louder, hungry for the sight of pain, for the amusement of seeing a weak life destroyed. She was not seen as a person, not even as an enemy, only as a toy to be mocked. A living piece of trash to remind the galaxy of who held power here. High above the pit, banners of different alien houses waved, each symbol marking the ruling factions, who enjoyed watching slaves suffer. Drinks were spilled, bets were shouted, and the air smelled of smoke, metal, and something rotten. The announcer, a tall creature with glowing green eyes and a cruel grin, raised his hand and the crowd went silent. His voice echoed across the chamber as he spoke of the girl's capture, her weakness, and how little value her life had. He mocked her cries, called her a useless thing, then promised the audience she would not last long. The crowd cheered again, some chanting for her to be burned, others laughing as they shouted for her to be torn apart. The girl stumbled as she was pushed to the center. She could barely lift her head. Her hair was tangled, her lips cracked, and her eyes dim with exhaustion. But in those eyes, behind the bruises and pain, was a flicker of something that refused to die. She looked out at the sea of faces that wanted her destroyed, and still, for a heartbeat, she clenched her fists. It was weak, trembling, but it was defiance. The guards saw it, and they laughed as one kicked her hard in the stomach, forcing her back down into the dirt. The crowd loved it. In the shadows of the stands, among the crowd of shouting aliens, a human sat in silence. He was the only one of his kind there, a man wrapped in a dark jacket, his face hidden in the half-light. Unlike the others, he did not shout or cheer. His eyes were fixed on the girl, watching her with an intensity that none noticed. He saw the way her body bent under the blows, the way her chains bit into her skin, and the way she still tried to rise, even when the world told her to stay down. Something burned inside him as he sat there, something that had nothing to do with amusement. He had seen wars before, seen cruelty in many forms, but this was different. This was not battle, this was humiliation, and it made his blood boil. The announcer shouted again, this time calling for someone from the crowd to step down and finish the game. It was tradition. Someone would step forward, pick up a weapon, and decide how the prisoner would die. The audience roared. Names were shouted, hands raised, but then the human moved. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up from his place in the shadows. The laughter quieted in confusion as a single human walked toward the arena's steps. The guards sneered, unsure of what this meant, but they did not stop him. When he stepped into the light, the girl lifted her head for the first time, her tired eyes locking onto him. The crowd laughed again, jeering at the sight. A human? Someone shouted. Too soft for this. Another mocked. He'll cry before he swings. The announcer grinned, certain the human would add to the humiliation. He shoved a blade toward him, expecting him to deliver the final act. The human looked at the blade, then looked back at the girl lying broken on the ground. He didn't move to take it. Instead, he walked past the announcer, past the guards, and bent down beside her. His voice, low and steady, carried through the silent pit. No one is going to touch her. The entire arena froze. The announcer blinked, stunned. The guards looked at each other, unsure if they had heard right. The crowd murmured in disbelief. The girl herself stared up at him, confused, as if her ears were lying to her. The human reached out and gently lifted her head, his hands steady, protective, the opposite of everything she had known. He rose with her in his arms, chains clinking as he held her weight. She was frail, almost weightless, but the act itself felt heavier than a warship. Shouts of anger erupted. This is against tradition. Kill them both. the announcer demanded he stop, but the human only turned his eyes toward the crowd. His expression was calm, yet behind it was a fire, a warning that none could mistake. He was not here to play their game. He was not here to laugh with them. He was here to defy them. And in that moment, before the chaos broke loose, before the guards moved, the arena itself seemed to hold its breath. One act of mercy had just shattered the rules of their cruel world. The silence after his words was like a deep wound cutting across the arena. Thousands of voices that had been roaring with laughter a moment ago now hung still in the air, uncertain, trembling with disbelief. The announcer's mouth opened and closed like a machine caught in a glitch, unable to process what had just happened. A human weak, despised, barely tolerated in this sector had dared to step into their sacred pit and refuse the will of the crowd. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever turned away from the rules. The guards hesitated, their whips buzzing with energy as they glanced at each other. To them, the human was just flesh, just another fragile body waiting to break. But there was something in his posture, the way he stood with the broken girl cradled in his arms, that made them falter. His eyes were steady, sharp like the edge of a blade, and though his hands were gentle on her, the rest of him carried an air of violence waiting to be unleashed. The announcer found his voice again, louder this time, his words echoing across the chamber. You dare deny the will of the audience? You dare to step into this pit and speak against our law? Put her down, obey or bleed beside her. His voice cracked with anger, but behind it was fear. The human didn't flinch. He shifted, his weight balancing the girl against his chest as though she were made of glass, and spoke again, his words calm but laced with steel. You've had your fun. It ends now. The crowd erupted, half in fury, half in shock. Some shouted for blood, others laughed, certain the human was insane. The guards surged forward, weapons raised, but before they could strike, the man moved. He stepped back, his body low and controlled, and with a single motion, his elbow struck the first guard's throat. The alien stumbled, choking, before collapsing. The second raised his whip, but the human's leg shot out, kicking hard into his knee with a snap that echoed like breaking wood. The alien screamed, falling sideways. The arena howled in outrage. The announcer's voice screeched, demanding the guards tear him apart. More soldiers poured into the pit, armored and armed, their boots pounding against the sand. The human's jaw tightened. He shifted the girl into one arm, holding her with surprising ease, then reached with his free hand under his jacket. Metal gleamed as he pulled free, a weapon small, human-made, and deadly. The crowd gasped. They had thought him unarmed. A sharp flash lit the air as he fired. The first guard's chest exploded in sparks, armor cracking under the human's gunfire. Another shot cut through a whip mid-swing, severing it like paper. The crowd screamed, some retreating in panic, others leaning forward, thrilled by the sudden violence. The announcer shouted over them, his face pale now. Realizing control of the spectacle was slipping, the girl clung weakly to him, her breath shallow, her eyes wide. She had expected pain, death, the same cycle of humiliation as before, meant now. She felt the steady rhythm of his heart against her cheek, the way he shielded her from every strike, every sound of violence. She could not understand it. Why would a stranger risk everything for her? Her lips trembled, but no words came. The human moved with precision, his steps careful, his strikes efficient. He did not waste motion. He did not fight for show, thought. To leave? Every time a guard stepped closer, he went down. Every time a weapon rose, the human broke it. And all the while, he kept the girl safe, shielding her from the storm. At last, a heavy gate at the far end of the arena opened, the massive iron doors grinding upward. More guards were rushing in, dozens now, their armor shining under the pits. Lights. The announcer grinned again, certain this would overwhelm the intruder. You will drown in blood, human, he sneered. No one defies us and lives. But then something unexpected happened. From the stands, whispers began to rise. Not everyone was shouting for his death. Some of the lower-class workers, slaves, and servants pressed into the upper tiers were watching with wide eyes, their voices low but growing. They had seen countless creatures die in this pit, but never had they seen someone step in not to kill but to save. For the first time, hope flickered in the darkness of their prison world. The human glanced around, his mind sharp, calculating. He couldn't hold the pit forever. He needed an escape. His gaze fixed on a maintenance hatch high along the arena wall. It was narrow, almost hidden, but reachable with the right path. He adjusted his grip on the girl, whispered into her ear, his voice firm but soft enough that only she could hear.
Hold on to me.
Don't let go. The girl's fingers, fragile and trembling, curled against his jacket. Her voice was barely a whisper, almost broken. Why? Why are you doing this? Human didn't answer, not yet. His eyes stayed locked on the hatch as he fired again, cutting down another guard. The answer wasn't for now. The answer was in his actions. With one final glance at the crowd, he tightened his jaw, then broke into a sprint. Bullets in energy. Bolts tore across the pit as guards screamed. The crowd roared in chaos. The announcer shouted orders that no one could hear. And through it all, the human ran with the girl in his arms. Straight toward the hatch, straight toward defiance, refusing the rules, refusing their cruelty, refusing to let them take her life. For the first time, the galaxy's cruelest arena was not a place of death. It was the place where everything broke apart. The pit was chaos. Alarms shrieked. The announcer screamed into his mic for control, and guards stormed in from every direction. But the human didn't slow. His boots pounded against the blood-stained sand, each stride deliberate, each breath steady. He was no longer a stranger in their arena. He was a storm tearing through their order. The girl clung to him, her face buried against his chest, trembling as fire and steel clashed around them. Energy bolts streaked across the air, scorching the walls and slicing through the haze. The crowd roared from above, half demanding the human's death, half shrieking in terror at the defiance unfolding before their eyes. The announcer's words echoed, distorted as he howled commands. Kill him, tear the human apart. He is nothing, yet his voice cracked, betraying the truth he refused to face. For the first time in the arena's history, someone had refused their will. The human fired back, his shots sharp and precise, never wasted. Each blast tore into a guard's armor, sparks and screams filling the pit. He didn't fight like a desperate man. He fought like a soldier who had walked through worse, who had carried the weight of old wars behind his steady hands. The girl felt it in the way he moved. No hesitation, no panic. He wasn't trying to survive. He was determined. To win above them, the crowd's fury was shifting. Some of the nobles jeered louder, demanding blood to restore their pride. But others, the slaves, the broken ones pressed into the higher tiers, leaned forward, eyes wide, hearts hammering. They had never seen a man fight, not for glory, not for sport, but for another's life. For the first time, hope rippled through them like a spark in the dark. The human's gaze stayed locked on the maintenance hatch, high on the arena wall. That was his exit. That was freedom. He ducked behind a shattered pillar. The girl pressed tight against him as bolts of energy scorched the stone. His voice was low, firm, and steady against her ear. When I move, you hold on. Don't look back. Understand? She managed to nod, her throat too dry to speak. Her body was weak, bruised, almost broken, but the sound of his voice steadied her in a way she had never known. The guards regrouped, a full squad charging into the pit with heavy shields raised. The announcer bared his teeth in triumph, certain this wall of armor would crush the human's advance. The human only narrowed his eyes. He shifted the girl's weight to one arm, his gun steady in the other. He didn't fire at their shields. Instead, he aimed higher toward the lighting rigs above the arena. 3 shots rang out, sharp and clean. Metal sparked, cables snapped, and with a scream of steel, one of the massive light fixtures collapsed. It crashed down like thunder, crushing half the squad beneath it. Dust and smoke filled the pit, blinding the others. The crowd screamed, panic. Spilling into their voices now, the human didn't wait. He surged forward, weaving through the smoke, his body a blur of motion. The guard lunged at him, but the human shoulder slammed into the alien's chest, sending him sprawling. Another raised a blade, but the human twisted, kicking out with brutal force that snapped bone. Step by step, strike by strike, he carved a path toward the wall. The girl's heart pounded against his chest, every breath sharp with fear. Yet she felt it that strange, its unshakable certainty that he would not let her fall. At last he reached the wall beneath the hatch. It was high, far too high for anyone carrying another. The announcer laughed bitterly through the speakers, his voice cracking with desperation. "Climb, human. Climb and die. If you cannot make it, you cannot escape." The human ignored him. He set the girl down gently for the first time, crouching low so her weak body leaned against the stone. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "You'll leave me?" His hand rested against her shoulder, firm and steady. "Never. I'll lift you first, then I'll follow." His tone carried no doubt, no hesitation, only a promise etched in steel above. More guards were pushing into the stands, weapons ready. Time was vanishing. The human crouched, his hands forming a step. "Climb," he ordered. The girl hesitated, shaking her head. I can't, you can." He cut her off, his voice low but fierce. "You've survived worse than this. Now climb." Something in his tone struck through her fear. With trembling arms, she stepped into his grip. He hoisted her upward with a surge of strength, pushing her toward the hatch. Her fingers caught the edge, slipping once, twice, but then locking on. She pulled, her body screaming in pain, but she refused to let go. Inch by inch, she dragged herself through the opening, collapsing just inside. The human exhaled, relief flashing for a moment before the ground shook behind him. Heavy footsteps thundered as a massive figure entered the pit. It was no ordinary guard. This one was armored like a war machine, its towering frame bristling with weapons, eyes glowing with fury. The crowd roared, sensing a final spectacle. The announcer's voice boomed with triumph once again. "Face the juggernaut, human. Your defiance ends here." The girl, lying just inside the hatch, turned her head back, eyes wide with horror. "No, leave it. Come up," she cried, her voice cracking. But the human didn't move toward the hatch. His gaze locked on the armored giant stepping into the arena. Slowly, he raised his weapon, his stance shifting. His voice was quiet, almost too low to hear, but the girl caught it. "I said I'd follow. But first I finish this." And with that, he moved forward, straight into fire. The forest had always been silent at night, broken only by the sound of insects and the whisper of wind through the trees. But now it carried another sound, her breathing. The alien girl, weak and trembling, lay curled beneath a blanket Hunter had given her. Every few minutes, she gasped, as though her body remembered some old pain she could not escape. Hunter sat a short distance away, a small fire glowing faintly between them. He had never been one for company, never cared much for strangers, but he could not shake the sight of how she had been thrown aside, used as a spectacle and left to die. That kind of cruelty lodged deep in a man's chest. He told himself he had taken her only to ease his own conscience. Yet as the flames lit her thin frame, he felt a weight growing heavier than he expected. The girl opened her eyes for a brief moment. They were not human, not even close. The pupils were wide, shaped like shards of glass, and they glowed faintly in the firelight. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Only a dry rasp, like someone who had not spoken in days. Hunter leaned forward, gently placing a cup of water at her side. She stared at it, her hands trembling as she reached for it, but stopped halfway, as though unsure if she was allowed. Hunter slid it closer with a quiet nod. That small act, so simple, seemed to break something inside her, welled up in her alien eyes, and she turned her face away as though ashamed to be seen. Hunter leaned back, unsure what to do with the silence. He had fought men before, lived through the madness of border wars, and seen things that could break a soldier's mind. But this was different. This was not a battlefield. This was a girl, broken, nameless, and barely alive. He wondered who she had been before the chains, before the crowd's laughter. He wondered what kind of world she had come from, yet he did not ask. He knew she could not answer, and part of him feared that if she did, he would no longer be able to distance himself from her. As the night deepened, the air turned cold. Hunter tossed another log into the fire, the sparks scattering upward like fading stars. The sound made her flinch violently, her whole body jerking as though expecting pain to follow. Hunter froze, his jaw tightening. Whatever had been done to her had carved scars deeper than he could see. Slowly, he spoke, his voice steady but low. "You're safe here. No one's going to touch you." He did not know if she understood the words, but he hoped the tone was enough. Hours passed before exhaustion pulled her into a restless sleep. Hunter stayed awake, his hand resting near the rifle beside him. He wasn't afraid of her, he was afraid of what might be following her. A girl like her did not simply end up in a human settlement by chance. Someone had captured her, someone had dragged her here, and someone had decided she was worthless enough to throw away. That kind of someone did not just disappear. If they realized she had survived, they might come looking. If they did, they would not stop at her. The forest around him seemed darker than usual, the silence heavier. Hunter's instincts prickled. He scanned the trees, his soldier's mind reading. Shadows like open books. Somewhere far off, a branch snapped. Out. Too sharp to be an animal. Too deliberate to be an accident. His grip tightened on the rifle, his muscles tensing. He waited, every nerve alive, listening for movement. But after a long silence, nothing came, only the wind. He forced himself to breathe, telling himself it was just the night playing tricks. But the unease stayed, refusing to fade. At dawn, the girl stirred again. Her eyes opened to the light seeping through the branches, and she whispered something soft and broken. Hunter could not understand the words, but the tone was desperate, almost pleading. She looked at him as if expecting judgment, waiting for the cruelty she had always known. Hunter only shook his head. "You don't have to beg," he said firmly. "Not here." Her lips trembled, and though no human word escaped her, a faint sound came, something that might have been the first attempt at trust. Hunter felt something shift inside him. He had not asked for this. He had not wanted this. But now that she was here, fragile and afraid, he could not send her away. He could not let her vanish into the forest to die alone. Yet the question clawed at his mind, how long before the world came crashing in to tear her away again? How long before the men who treated her as a toy decided they had unfinished business? For now, he told himself, it didn't matter. For now, she needed food, water, and a place to heal. And he would give her that, no matter what came next. But in the back of his mind, the sound of that broken branch echoed like a warning. The sun hung low, bleeding red light across the forest as Hunter prepared a small meal from what little he had. Smoke from the fire curled into the air, sharp against the cool wind that whispered through the trees. The alien girl sat wrapped in the same blanket, her thin frame trembling less than before, but her eyes still darted at every sound. She held the food he had given her in both hands, staring at it as though it were something sacred. When she finally took a bite, she did it slowly, like someone who expected the taste to vanish if she moved too quickly. Hunter pretended not to notice, keeping his eyes on the fire, but inside he felt something stir, heavy, not of anger, not at her, but at whatever kind of monsters had left her this way. The quiet stretched on, broken only by the crackle of fire and the faint hum of insects. Then the forest gave a sound Hunter did not like. A crow burst out from the trees, its wings slashing the air as it fled into the darkening sky. He froze, his instincts sharp as a blade. Animals always knew before humans did. Something was moving out there. Slowly he reached for his rifle. Not drawing attention to the action, but making sure it was ready, the girl noticed, her eyes widening. She set the food aside and curled closer to the ground, as if she knew what danger meant. Hunter scanned the tree line. The shadows were long, the forest thick, but he felt eyes watching. He waited, body still, until the faint crunch of boots came from the distance. His pulse slowed into the rhythm of battle, steady, measured, patient. He knew that sound. Hunters. not wanderers, men, and not just one. The girl made a low sound, almost like a warning, and pointed weakly into the trees. Hunter pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence. Then he leaned close, his voice a whisper that carried steel. "Stay low, stay quiet." Shapes emerged between the trees. 3 men at first, armed with blades and crude rifles. Their faces carried the smirk of predators who thought they owned the night. Hunter knew the type, the kind who preyed on weakness, the kind who saw cruelty as entertainment. One of them spotted the faint glow of the fire and gestured to the others. They moved closer, slow and confident. Hunter did not move. He counted their steps, tracked their weapons, measured the way they held themselves. He had been a soldier long enough to know their skill or lack of it. These were not professionals. They were scavengers. Dangerous, but sloppy. Still, the girl beside him would not survive a mistake. One of the men called out in a mocking voice, his words cutting through the still air. "Looks like we found our little prize again. Thought she'd crawl off and die, did you? Guess fate had other plans." His laugh was sharp, ugly. The girl flinched at the sound, her body curling smaller. Hunter stood then, slowly letting them see him. He kept his rifle lowered but ready, his stance calm. "She's not yours," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing like stone. The men paused, sizing him up. The leader, tall and scarred, sneered, "Not ours. We dragged her. Out here we paid good credits for the fun. She belongs to us." His eyes narrowed at Hunter. "So unless you want to bleed for someone who isn't even your kind, step aside." Hunter didn't move. Silence was heavier than words, and his rifle shifted ever so slightly into position. The leader's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of doubt. But pride is poison. He spat on the ground and waved his hand. "Take him!" The first man lunged forward with his blade. Hunter's rifle barked once, the sound splitting the forest wide open. The attacker dropped before he even hit the ground. The firelight flickered across his fallen body, painting the other men's faces with sudden fear. The leader cursed, raising his weapon, but Hunter had already moved. Another shot, clean and sharp, tore through the night. The second man collapsed against a tree, his rifle clattering uselessly to the dirt. The leader froze, caught between rage and survival, his eyes wide. He looked from Hunter to the girl, then back again, and for the first time, he seemed to realize this was not a fight he could win. But men like him didn't walk away clean. He backed slowly into the shadows, his voice carrying one last venomous promise: "You'll regret this. She's marked. They'll come for her, and they'll come for you too. You think you can hide in the woods? They'll burn it all to the ground if they have to." Then he vanished into the trees, swallowed. By the night, Hunter lowered his rifle, but did not relax. He knew the threat was real. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Whoever had owned her, whoever had dragged her into the human world to be mocked and broken, would not give up after losing a few men. They would come harder, stronger, and soon. Behind him, the girl shivered violently, her eyes fixed on the dark. Where the man had disappeared, Hunter crouched beside her, his voice steady. "He's gone for now. You're safe tonight." But even as he spoke the words, he knew safety was an illusion. He had made a choice the moment he pulled that trigger. He had tied his fate to hers. And now whoever hunted her would hunt him too. The fire burned lower, shadows closing in around them. Hunter sat with the rifle across his knees, his eyes never leaving the tree line. He knew sleep would not come. Not for him. Not tonight. And far away, deeper in the dark, the sound of more footsteps began to gather. The forest did not sleep. The wind carried whispers through the branches, and every sound felt sharper, more dangerous. As if the trees themselves were warning Hunter that the night would not pass quietly. He sat with his rifle across his knees, his eyes locked on the blackness beyond the dying fire. The alien girl huddled beside him, wrapped in the blanket, her breathing uneven. She was exhausted, but fear kept her awake. Every time the forest cracked with the sound of shifting branches, she tensed, as if expecting claws or chains to drag her back. Hunter had seen soldiers like this before, broken by war, by cruelty, by men who believed they owned others. Now he knew the truth. Whoever had claimed her would not stop until she was returned. The first sign came as a low mechanical hum that did not belong to the forest. Hunter's head snapped toward the sound, his body going rigid. Engines small, but close. The girl's eyes widened as she clutched the blanket tighter, whispering something in her language, a string of syllables heavy with dread. Hunter didn't need translation. Whatever she said, it meant only one thing. They were coming. Moments later, a pale light cut through the trees, sweeping across the darkness like a blade. Not firelight, not torches. Flood lamps, mounted on hovering craft. The beams carved open the forest, burning away the shadows, and Hunter's pulse slowed to that familiar steady rhythm he always found before battle. The night was no longer silent. Shouts carried across the trees, metallic voices calling out in an organized pattern. These weren't scavengers anymore. These were hunters trained, disciplined, and armed with technology meant to track and capture. Hunter acted fast. He kicked dirt over the fire until the flames choked out, plunging them into near darkness. Then he pulled the girl close, his voice low and firm. "We move now." She obeyed instantly, clinging to him as he guided her into the thick underbrush. His boots found silent paths, every step chosen with precision. He had hunted men before, and he knew how hunters thought. He also knew the mistake they always made. They assumed their prey was weak. The light swept closer, voices sharper now. Hunter could make out words. "Search pattern east. Scan for biosigns. She won't get far." A harsh laugh followed. "And if she's with someone, we bring him in too. Doesn't matter who he is." Hunter kept low, crawling with the girl through the undergrowth. Could feel her trembling, her breath quick against his shoulder. Her hands dug into his jacket as though letting go would mean death. He tightened his grip on her arm, steadying her, guiding her deeper into the maze of trees. The hunters were methodical, sweeping their lights in arcs, their machines humming above the canopy. They were not rushing. They were confident, too confident. The first drone appeared above the branches, its red sensor eye glowing as it scanned the ground. Hunter froze, pressing the girl into the dirt, his hand covering her head. The beam passed inches from them, bathing the leaves in artificial light. Counted the seconds, his breath locked in his chest, until the drone drifted past. Only then did he move, pulling her with him. He knew the pattern now. They weren't here to kill, not yet. They wanted her alive. And men like these would burn entire forests if it meant dragging her back in chains. Hunter led them to a ravine where the earth split open. The dry stream choked with rocks and roots. He slid down, pulling her with him, then crouched low. A moment, they were hidden. The girl pressed close to him, whispering again in her language. And though he didn't know the words, he understood the desperation in her voice. She was pleading with him to leave her, to save himself. Hunter shook his head, his voice flat, unyielding. Not happening. Above them, the search grew louder. Boots thudded against the earth, men calling to one another. Then suddenly, flare hissed into the sky, exploding overhead in white fire that burned like a false sun. The forest was washed in light, shadows erased. Hunter cursed under his breath, pulling the girl deeper into the ravine. He could see the silhouettes of men at the rim now, scanning their rifles ready. One of them called out, "Tracks, down here." Hunter's muscles coiled. There was no more time to run. He pushed the girl against the rocks, his voice sharp and urgent. "Stay down. Don't move." Her eyes locked on his, wide and filled with terror, but she nodded. Hunter lifted his rifle, his breathing steady. The first figure leaned over the edge of the ravine, his lamp cutting through the dark, and Hunter fired. The man crumpled, his weapon tumbling from his grip as he fell back into the trees. Shouts erupted above. Gunfire cracked, bullets chewing into the earth around the ravine. Hunter moved fast, rolling to a better position, firing again. Another man fell, his lamp shattering into sparks. The girl covered her ears, rocking against the stone as chaos filled the night. But for every man Hunter dropped, more voices rose. More lights swept the forest. The hum of drones thickened, their red eyes glowing as they converged on the ravine. Hunter knew the truth. Then this wasn't a simple recovery team. This was a hunt, and they had brought enough men to make sure. It ended one way. Still, he stood his ground, every shot precise, every movement measured. The girl stared at him, not with fear this time, but with something else, something like hope. And as the hunters closed in, as the night filled with fire and death, Hunter felt that same knot in his chest twist tighter. He had chosen his side. And now, the war, small as it began, had truly started. The forest burned with light, and the hunt pressed closer.